This is Garis, masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 486, entitled "When Women Don't Empathize with Men regarding women's oppression of men, are women then callous or stupid?" Description. I'm having a bit of a problem with my LATting, that's living apart together, girlfriend. She has no empathy towards masculist anger and hatred towards fluffy manslavers and fluffy feminist hypocrite genociders. I suspect this is not just an individual quirk of her personality, but rather a deep, collectively unconscious female fear of group male anger at women, which evolved when such anger could have led to women's death by being thrown out of the group or tribe to fend for themselves. The flyer itself. When women don't empathize with men regarding women's oppression of men, are women then callous or stupid? By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I have a bit of a problem with my LATting girlfriend. LAT, that's L-A-T, is living apart together. That is, we both have our own dwelling and we spend 4 days a week together and 3 days a week apart. We are both FIPs, that's financially independent persons. So neither of us financially parasites off the money and labour of the other. That is, we live the twee-twef lifestyle. In brackets, twee-twef equals 2A, 2F said quickly. That is, 2 apartments, 2 FIPs. That is, a relationship between a man and a woman where both have their own apartment and both are FIPs, which has considerable advantages for the man compared to the traditional full-time relationship that men had with women, being man-slaves to them, working for them full-time for decades of men's lives to get a bit of sex from time to time. The great advantage of LATting for a man is that the only thing that keeps the relationship together is the quality of the relationship. If the woman starts nagging, the man walks. If the woman starts trying to control him, he walks. If she withholds sex, he walks. If she stops being nice to him, he walks. A similar logic holds in the reverse direction. So both partners in a LATting relationship are motivated to be nice to each other, to be civil, not to nag, to give each other regular and good sex, which usually comes naturally, since there is a weekly separation of some days, which allows the heart to grow fonder and the libido to frustrate due to the separation. I have such a relationship with my LATting girlfriend, and most things are rosy, even though at the time of writing this LATting relationship is 1.5 years old, a good sign for its longer term viability. However, I'm noticing that there is a bit of a problem, which concerns my girlfriend's inability to empathize with masculist hatred of women who manslave them. She instinctively, I feel, bristles at masculist talk of hatred of women who are manslavers, that is, fluffies who don't bother to fip up and expect to be able to live for decades of their lives off the money and labour of a man. Nor does she have an intuitive emotional hatred against what is happening to one father in 4 in the fluffy feminist hypocrite genocider-dominated divorce courts. When I try to pin her down on her attitudes towards masculist hatred of fluffies and fluffy feminists, she says she merely has an instinctive revulsion of male hatred towards women and closes her mind to any female sympathy towards men regarding men's oppression by women. I ask her, quote, Imagine you learned that the man next door owned a gold mine in Africa that used black slaves. How would you feel towards him? She said she would feel strong antagonism towards him. I then answer that what fluffies are doing to men in today's world is similar, but is a much bigger problem, since manslavery is a hugely larger problem than Negro slavery, given the number of manslaves in the world today, that is, billions. She says she can see that, but when I express my masculinist hatred of fluffies with their manslavery, and my masculinist hatred of fluffy feminist hypocrite genociders for what they are doing to one father in 4 in the divorce courts, she stiffens up, and I realise I have lost her. This is annoying for me, but not a deal breaker. All relationships are compromises. If I broke off this relationship because of her lack of empathy with men for how women oppress men, then I would probably lose more than I would gain. I know that the MGTOWs complain endlessly about women not understanding MGTOW ideas, and this makes me wonder if something similar is happening with women about masculist ideas. I wonder whether my girlfriend's lack of empathy towards men regarding men's oppression by women is an individual quirk of hers, or is it more universal, that is, characteristic of her sex, that is, that her female brain is simply incapable of having the same feelings of hatred that masculins have towards fluffy manslavers and fluffy feminist hypocrite genociders? Question mark. For those who are not familiar with these masculist descriptions of these two categories of women, I give now a brief explanation. Masculists label fluffies, in brackets, that is, traditional women, who expect to be able to live off the labour and money of a man for decades, in brackets, manslavers, because they enslave men, instead of bothering to get off their fat parasitic asses and fip up by bothering to get a career competent education so that they can be fips as adults and not fluffy style expect to manslave a man for decades of his life. Men gave women science-based medicine and a life expectancy of 85 years, and the contraceptive pill, household gadgets, higher education, so that women have typically only 0, 1 or 2 kids, so have a career window of half a century. So the masculists put enormous moral pressure on women to get off their fat parasitic asses and pull their own financial weight by becoming fips. One of the main political aims of the masculists is to create a fip society where all adults are fips. The fluffy feminists are seen by the masculists as hypocrites, since these feminists have taken over the divorce courts and made divorce toxic for divorcing fathers. These feminists expect to have equal rights with men in the parliaments, but behave as fluffies in the divorce courts by not accepting equal obligations with men to fip up and pull their financial weight after a divorce. Thus fluffy feminists behave as feminists in the parliaments, but as fluffy manslavers in the divorce courts, which is obviously hypocritical of them. Far worse is that they are also indirect genociders, since they have made divorce so toxic for divorcing fathers, open brackets, for example, ripping his kids away from him with a 90% probability, losing his house to his ex-wife so that she can raise her kids in it, forced to pay for his kids, whom he will barely see, lose half his stuff to her, half his wealth, and if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and fip up, so that she continues to parasite off his money and labour after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. In many Western countries now, divorce is seen by some 2/3 of young men as so toxic that they see marriage and paternity as toxic, so decide to live the MGTOW, that's MGTOW, that is men going their own way, lifestyle of refusing to marry, rejecting paternity and spending their money on themselves. This is obviously crashing the birth rate, But these millions of men are merely reacting to the toxicity of the divorce courts taken over by the hated, fluffy feminist hypocrite genociders. The masculists see these fluffy feminists as indirect genociders since they are wiping out whole populations. If the divorce courts are not soon men-fared, then the proportion of young men refusing to marry and have kids will probably be over 90% within a decade, and hence whole population will be wiped out within a mere generation, a truly alarming prospect that must soon come to the attention of the gender politicians, who must then solve this enormous problem. When I present the above case to my girlfriend, I get the impression she understands it at an intellectual level, but still rejects it at an emotional level because of the hatred of women, that is, fluffy manslavers and fluffy feminist hypocrite genociders, expressed by the very angry, hateful masculists who are out to change all this by lashing out at women, punishing them severely by depriving them of their sperm, forcing women into babylessness. And if these women are real misandrous, male-dumping, feminazi bitch-type feminists, then they are not even pumped and dumped, but are totally ignored, forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at for being man-slaving parasites and hypocritical genociders, truly despised and hated by the masculists. I suspect that my girlfriend is not acting merely as an individual whose behaviour and attitudes to the above masculist ideas are not merely a reflection of her individual quirks and personality, but is manifesting a deep, collectively unconscious fear that women evolved to have in the distant past towards male rejection. In the distant past, if a woman was collectively rejected by the men of her tribe or group and was cast out of the group, then that usually meant death for her. I'm sensing with my girlfriend that she is feeling a deep existential threat with my masculinist ideas. If that is the case, that is, that if millions of women feel much the same, that is, that they may claim to understand masculinist ideas at an intellectual level, but feel repulsed and deeply threatened by masculinist hatred of certain categories of women, that is, fluffy manslavers and fluffy feminist hypocrite genociders, then that is really going to cause the masculists a major problem. It will make masculists collectively cynical and contemptuous of women as a sex, making men see women as children, incapable of fitting up effectively to become emo, as EMO, FIPS, that is, fit women who feel equal moral obligations to be FIPS, close brackets, who behave as responsible adults and have an intuitive empathy with men for the ways that fluffies and fluffy feminists truly oppress men, and far worse than vice versa. To masculists, even rape is small beer in comparison to the decades-lasting man-slavery of fluffies. It's likely that next year, that is 2022, I'll be presenting masculinist ideas to the public in public talks at my local university, either as an invited speaker or as an audience member, making masculinist comments during the Q&A period after a talk by someone else has finished. I'll be able to see whether most women react in the same way as my girlfriend. If so, if women's visceral rejection of masculinist hatred of women, in brackets, for women's fluffy manslavery or for fluffy feminist butchery of one father in four in the divorce courts that they control, close brackets, is commonplace amongst women, then that will only alienate masculists all the more and increase their level of contempt for fluffies and fluffy feminists and for women in general, since if most women have a deeply held fear of collective rejection by men, then that will only make the task of the masculists to liberate men by men-faring the gender laws all the more difficult. It's then likely that the level of collective masculinist anger and hatred of women for women's lack of empathy towards men's oppression by women will increase, and that will only sour relations between the sexes even more. It will make masculists see women more as children, who are incapable of seeing the very negative ways that women oppress men. And hence masculists will be more inclined to treat women as immature creatures, forcing them to fip up and to vote with men for the men-fairing of the gender laws, or be severely punished by men by women not getting men's sperm and not getting married. We men have the power to force women to fip up, to grow up, since a fluffie can only be a fluffie if she can get her financial claws into some stupid, ignorant, gullible, manslavable man. But thanks to the masculists and MGTOWs on the internet, the supply of such gullible men is drying up. Millions of young women now are really starting to panic as they experience that boyfriend after boyfriend refuses to give her their sperm, thus forcing her to be babyless, which is driving these young women crazy. The masculists are putting powerful moral pressure on women to fip up, to adopt emo-fip values, and to truly empathize with men for the ways that women oppress men. Or masculists will bite their fucking heads off, labelling them MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, and will punish them by forcing them to be manless, rotting on the shelf, thus removing their callous feminazi bitch genes from the gene pool, effectively wiping them out, slowly, by totally ignoring them. Masculists want women to be snurfs, that's S-N-U-R-F, yes, that is slim, nurturative, fips. Masculists do not want women who are misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi bitches who are incapable of being empathetic to men for the ways that women oppress men. This lack of empathy on the part of women, I suspect, is going to be a very big problem between the sexes in the coming decades, as men claim this decade of the 2020s